Everyone is welcome here, it's time to make new friends. Aquavide Uskava, fill your Glencairn. Share a dram with the spirit of Edmonton.
Slancha! Good evening, whiskey brothers, sisters, and friends, and welcome to episode 86 of the Canadian Whisky Journey's Whiskey Review on Banff. I'm the creator of the Canadian Whisky Journey. I'm President Alberta Scott Society, Spirit of Edmonton on social media. More importantly, I'm your host tonight. And tonight is the fourth installment of the 2024 Banff Whiskey Experience Series. And we've had several distilleries. We had Burwood, Wildlife, Dione. This week we've got these two gentlemen. So we've got Brett and Bryce from well, I don't know. Should I be calling you the Maligne range or the Maligne distillery? Because I have I've said both, and I don't know which one's right. But welcome. How you doing?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us. We're pretty excited to be here. I think both are fitting. You know, within the Jasper community, it's been a strange time to open. We were slated to open about 2 days after the fire swept through, so it was a bit of a strange kind of recalibrating the reopen. But you know, I think within the town, we're kind of amongst the locals already kind of getting called the distillery. But Maligne Range is where we built the brand off of. It's the range of the biggest range in the around Jasper. But both are fitting, and we're happy with both.
Excellent. And the nice little that icon, we're going to see that more and more and more. So welcome, gentlemen. What do you have in your glasses tonight?
I think tonight we're diving in because, you know, to be honest with you, Brett and I, you know, we're traveling so much that we don't actually get a chance to, you know, sit down together with a whiskey. So we've gone through Tequila before, we've gone through Excelsior, but tonight we're picking our newest one, Amber Mountain, that we've never had a time to really you know, get into it together. So we decided tonight would be the night. Why not?
That's a good time. That's excellent, and it's beautiful. And thank you for these. I picked them up this afternoon at Campio Brewing here in Edmonton. So you, at this point in time, are at, you said,
Last Best.
Downstairs at Last Best. And so you're in Calgary. I'm in Edmonton. Pick these up. You're back and forth from Jasper as well. Let's start with kind of a background with the parent company, so that we can put all these together in one. So because people have been to various different ones. So Brett, I think this is a question for you. Help us out with the background with all of it.
I'm happy to speak to it. I'll keep myself concise because I can go on forever. I get pretty excited about talking about it. So yeah, I grew up in Jasper. I went to university in Edmonton, did mechanical engineering of all things. And after I graduated, instead of getting a real job, myself and a couple of friends from from Jasper, we started Jasper Brewing 2005.
Nice.
We were the first brewery in a national park in the country, and you know, early in terms of the craft beer movement in Alberta, and to a degree, you know, across Canada and Western Canada. And so we had a lot of fun, made a lot of mistakes, we learned a lot of lessons, and you know, we've been able to build our brands out from there. And Banff, you know, we got in there 2010. We were up in Fort McMurray, and I don't know if we'll talk about the Beast or not, but that's Wood Buffalo is not part of our portfolio anymore. But yep, we had a pretty exciting Beast whiskey experience coming out of there, and that's where we started distilling. We were pretty close to what was going on the regulatory side at the time. I'd started to get to know Bryce, who was, as he said earlier, pretty passionate about the spirit space. And we ordered a small Mueller pot still out of Germany with the excited anticipation of being able to get into spirits before the licenses changed. So, you know, since then we've fortunately had the opportunity to build our beer brands in Calgary with Last Best and Campio, as you mentioned, where you picked up the whiskey in Edmonton. But that's a real high level flyover. And, you know, back to the whiskey again, it was over 10 years ago we started making it. And the last thing I'll just say, I think we're extremely grateful for the opportunity that our beer business has afforded us, that we've been able to build our whiskey you know, inventory and age it to a point that we've been able to be patient to this point where we're finally ready to bring it to the world. And we've been able to leverage our beer business to get us here. So here we are, you know, 10, 11 years later, finally sharing our whiskey, and pretty excited to talk about it tonight. So that's a real
all at least 5 years old, and I'm happy that you're letting them age. And you have the unique experience where you have a little bit of backing, where you're not rushed right away to have to put it out right at 3 years in one day type thing. So let's talk about your background a little bit, just a little bit, and then we're going to get into Bryce's background. But you brewed, you're the business guy, but you did brew, so you do have an appreciation for the art.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, frankly speaking, coming out of university, I was fresh out of mechanical engineering, like deep in textbooks and all that. And, let's be honest, at the time I was drinking beer, but knew nothing about it. And so we got into it in Jasper Brewing. We bought a third-hand brewery out of a warehouse seizure out of Chicago through a broker in the Okanagan, and got hooked up with a really, really special guy in the beer front on this sort of true master brewer. And but I knew nothing. I was into the technical side, reading about it and whatnot, but fell in love with it. And I was really not good at it, especially the early days. Our beers were terrible. And I can say that because I was in charge of it. Fast forward as we started to understand what we were doing, and really, starting to listen to what the guests we were, serving our beer to in Jasper were looking for and what they were experiencing. And with that, with the international crowd, it was more diverse than I think you get in a lot of markets. And we were very fortunate to have that. But fast forward, we saw this opportunity to get into the whiskey in a lot of ways is aged beer in a lot of ways, right? You remove the hops and got aged beer. And, both from a passion for the product, but also, excited about the business, the market sort of opportunity. We just, we want to dive in, but I'll be fully transparent. We had no plan of what we were going to do, what we were going to make, and how we bring it to market. It was just, we really wanted to get into this. And, and that little adage of first who, then what, we got to know Bryce sort of through some industry contacts, and, his knowledge now and then, of course, the same, different degrees, learned lots, I'm sure, since then, but he was so far ahead of us in terms of the whiskey world then, and production and everything else. And we started there. The confidence came from, we were excited about it. We had some understanding of the basic sort of input, and we wanted to get into it. And thankfully, Bryce was willing to hang out with us.
Well, that's a perfect segue into Bryce. He spent his year and a half, almost 2 years at Harriet Watt in Scotland. He's a master distiller, and here, I don't think I put here, right there. Just have that up there while you guys talk. So a little bit of background, please, kind sir, what you started as, because it was not anywhere near the industry, and then how you changed. Why?
Yeah, so a bit of reverse, I think, than Brett. I had a real job coming out of university, and then I've been doing this thing for over 10 years now. But anyway, my initial career was actually in the healthcare. So I was a cardiac ICU nurse at U of A Hospital, pounding on chests and so on and so forth. And, loved it. Lovely career, lovely job, selfless, as well as we know all our healthcare professionals are. However, though, I always describe it, I had this, itch that needed to be scratched, or somewhat people would refer as the daemon. And I'd always been interested in what it looked like in the alcohol industry, especially with spirits. But, at the time there wasn't really any path, there's no high school guidance counselor that tells you to get into this. There's no real clear path on doing it, especially I was growing up in BC. So there's no main distilleries. Like there wasn't an Alberta Distillers, there wasn't a Black Velvet, there wasn't a Hiram Walker, if we're in Ontario and Quebec and stuff. So I had really no idea how to get into it, and let alone I was kind of dabbling a bit at the time. There was some information coming, resources online. So I decided that, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go find the best spot that I could do it in. And that was at Harriet Watt. They're kind of deemed as like the Harvard of brewing and distilling. So yep. I took a shot and got in, that year. At the time, the class was really only about, I think our class was maybe about 28 students from around the world, okay. That got in. So, I decided to take it. So, I always remember the day I told my parents I'd moved out of the hospital. Actually, my family's in the healthcare business. I was helping my mom with that at the time. and that was one of the family businesses. And I told them I'm leaving and moving to Scotland to pursue this feeling, of distilling, and it went over very, very well. My parents were very supportive. However, my father was a little bit more, being from small town Alberta, he wanted to teach me how to distill. And the first thing he said, I need to find a thick bottom Coke bottle. Like, where the hell do you find that? And I'm like, Dad, if I'm going to learn it, I'm going to learn it from the pros. And so I'm moving to Scotland. And obviously, with my red beard and everything, that's where the heritage goes back to. So I'm going back to the homeland and learning. And I'd been there before on some rugby trips, so I loved it and was very familiar. So off I went and ended up on Princess Street, not knowing where I was going to live, knowing school started in a week. And, I'm not saying I didn't sleep on the streets or anything. I definitely closed down some bars and roamed around the first couple nights while I stashed the bag away. But, there's always a hostel or something like that, around. So I did that journey kind of coming back. But even graduating, I was in the graduating class of 2011. And still in this province, there wasn't despite I knew that something would be changing for distilling, it still wasn't. I didn't do it till December 2013. So I immediately went into brewing, actually, and I ended up running Yellowhead Brewery for a while in Edmonton.
Right up here.
Yeah, and loved it there. And, I was just enamored with, brewing lagers and everything. I think I was on the helm of their only award that they won, but very passionate about that brewery at the time. But then got linked in with these guys, as well, and started kind of seeing, hey, we could get into this, and we were already, we knew each other from before, but we were already aligned on where we wanted the vision, on where we wanted to go, and so on and so forth. So.
Nice.
The rest
Do you have kind of a link to the other Harriet Watt people? Because Caitlin at Eau Claire, so she's Harriet Watt. Are there very many others in Alberta? I know of a couple other in BC, but
so for a while it was just me a bit. Other than there's a couple like older, like Graham Kendall came from there. He was the general manager at ADL at one time. I always bugged him because when I came back, I tried to get a job at ADL and I didn't even get a call from him. And he had mentioned, he's like, well, if I knew you're from Harriet Watt, for sure. But obviously my resume I dropped off at the front desk, never percolated.
Didn't make it to him.
And which is fine, there. But yeah, there's a couple now that are there. Obviously Caitlin, there's a couple around Calgary here. Preet, I think, is just finishing off he just finished off his with Anoka. So there's a couple around.
Yeah, and Gurpreet's coming on in 2 weeks, so we're gonna have him there. And as you guys are gonna be there at the Banff Whiskey Experience with me and them. And let's just intro the Banff Whiskey Experience. Just a couple little pictures here because I've got a lot of you guys in a second. Actually, a lot of it's not pictures, but it's all text. So that's the Banff Whiskey Experience. And what are we doing? There we go. Let's get another one, please. That one right there. And that's the one we're going to do. And we're doing that Saturday at 2:30, gentlemen. You guys will be in the room with 40 other people. And have you picked out your whiskey yet? Because, again, this is straight from the cask, not proof down or very little proof down. So I'm hoping you've already got something in mind that's coming.
Well, we have a couple things in mind, but it's not picked out yet. Okay. Whoever tells you that like it's picked out now, I would be suspect. Like, with these kind of things, you get so excited that we have a process of elimination that we'll be there.
Well, everyone that's there, you're going to know it's non-chill filtered, it's cask strength, it's straight from the cask, very little proof that's coming out. No one's had it before generally, or something that you're going to put out soon, proofed the way you want, but maybe not at that point in time. It's raw, it's strong, it's fun, and that's what it's all about that day. And it's going to be a great time. So let's get back to the history. So we've got an idea of you two gentlemen, who we are. A brewer that doesn't like to brew too much or didn't have too much faith in himself, and someone who changed directions drastically. And I admire you for that, sir, because I couldn't convince my wife to let me to go to Harriet-Watt. She's laughing in the background, but she wouldn't let me. I wanted to. I thought that would be the perfect way for this junior high teacher to kind of segue into a different career at Harriet-Watt. Ain't gonna happen. Maybe I'll retire and I'll do it anyways. And he had this old guy with his little decrepit body up there trying to distill with my walker getting stuck up there. That'll be me. So let's get into this. So and let's talk specifically about the Maligne range and when the concept for Maligne range came out. I don't know if this is something you've been thinking about for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, whatever it was. But when did that idea come? And Brett, was that yours or someone else's idea kind of coming into it? I want to know the conception. I want to know how this came to light for us, the concept.
Well, I mean, Bryce chime in here too, but it really just goes back to, like I said before, we were really excited about starting to make whiskey, lay it down, excited to see what happened with it. It's I felt like it's a science experiments in terms of everything about it, particularly the aging part. But in terms of Maligne range, I'd go back to just how we see ourselves in everything we do. And this certainly reflects where we've seen success and, even more so, I'd say our failures over the last 20 years, almost 20, we're 19 or so, almost 20 years old. It comes back to us for a basic piece around just, finding our place within a community. That's where we started the business. I mean, I was 22 years old and my two partners were 23, and we wanted an opportunity to have a place in the community in Jasper. We'd grown up there, but we wanted to place. And so that's really where it all started. And so anchoring from there forward, we really, really see this huge opportunity as we started to slowly understand the whiskey landscape in Canada. And there's all these wonderful historical legacy players and their products and their stories and everything that relate back to so many interesting things about Canada. But at the same time, really starting to see that Canadian whiskey is really not appreciated for what it is. It's misunderstood. It gets bucketed into just being rye and a few other things. But so much of what we produce from our wonderful agriculture, we've got all this malting that goes on here, but it's treated primarily as a commodity. And so starting to get this understanding of this opportunity in front of us of being in a position to play a part in changing how Canadian whiskey is appreciated here, locally, regionally, and nationally, and ultimately, I think on the world stage, we produce amazing whiskey here, and it's not appreciated. And so our view is that with our position in our core business model, we're bringing many people through an experience that we can help to build up that understanding and enjoyment, that we could play a role in shaping and reshaping to understand how people enjoy Canadian whiskey. And Maligne, for us, I mean, we're early stage and it's in a really bizarre scenario with this post-fire environment and hyper local, but it's already happening. Even, just one last thing I'll just say that we're experiencing right now is just it's pretty interesting having people come into Maligne right now. And we've got a spectrum of experiences in terms of flavors you can explore with only Canadian whiskey. And it's not to put any kind of negativity on all these wonderful products globally, but we have so much to offer here as Canadian whiskey suppliers, and collaboratively, working with all our peers, big and small. I'm so excited to hear those other players going to bring on this show. The opportunities in front of us to be a part of that, reshaping how people see and understand Canadian whiskey.
Nice. And you do that online. You have a lot of information there online, and just kind of digging through that takes a little bit, but it's worth people's time. But before we do that, I'm just going to do the Google pics of where you are in Jasper. So there you are, across the street from the train station. I was told initially that you were going to be in the cinema. Was that a consideration at one point? Here, I'm going to go closer in a little bit.
Well, that's exactly where we are actually. So we had an opportunity, the family, multi-generational family that had the Chaba Theater in Jasper. It didn't, coming through COVID, challenging model to say the least. And we had opportunity on the building, and we did. I can tell honestly, we looked at the theater model from several different angles, and the viability that wasn't there. And we had this exciting opportunity. We wanted to bring our whiskey to market, and it was the right fit, and so we were able to transform it into what it is today, the Maligne range experience, and that's where we've launched our whiskey brand.
Okay, and I haven't not been there since, so I haven't been to Jasper in, I think it's just over a year, but I didn't see it there or it being developed at that time. So when did you start construction?
Well, I guess we started right into the new year. It's a beautiful bones building. We were able to use most of the beautiful wood. From the front, there's a local guy, woodworker that did log home builder that did most of the front facades. We were able to kind of really emphasize and add a bit to the front. But the theater is in many ways it's a box. Slope floor was a real challenge. We had to deal with that. So some work there, but the space turned out just absolutely beautiful, and we feel it's just that perfect venue to start sharing the experience and getting people immersed in taking some out of getting them out of their comfort zone. And a lot of people don't drink whiskey, don't understand and appreciate it, and let alone Canadian whiskey. So it's we've got a pretty amazing environment to be a part of their first journey on that.
Well, and let's look at what you have online as well. So you do pay homage to Canadian whiskey, and I love Canadian whiskey, obviously, because I'm doing this. But I like what you're saying. I really do. So we pay homage, but you want to redefine it. So talk about the redefinition of whiskey, because actually answer this question for me first, and I'm going to go to Bryce for it. Bryce, what do you think of when people say Canadian whiskey? And for me, it's not what it was 15 years ago or 10 years ago. So maybe what you thought it was and what it is in your mind, if you could, please, Bryce.
Yeah, sure. I think where the opportunity with any small producer, any new producer in the market, is, and this is where the redefinition kind of comes from, or the next chapter, wherever you want to kind of wordsmith it. Essentially Canadian whiskey is known on the global stage as commodity whiskey. Yeah. When is Canadian whiskey going to come into the spotlight? Similar to the Irish whiskey has had a boom, Japanese whiskey has a boom, even Taiwan's having a boom. I think it's underrated, for what it is, but it's underrated simply because, the flavor profile probably is, that light, approachable smoothness limits the flavor profile. Okay.
Yep.
However, though, the definition is the most broad in any whiskey, I think, out of any whiskey main nation, that you have. So I always take a look, and I've always looked at it like, well, why is it? Well, once, our legacy players, and, Brett and I with Maligne, we don't get into that, big versus small, craft versus, whatever. I think the reality is, and this is coming from more of a business mindset, is, we have big players in the market that opened up years ago. Alberta Distillers in Calgary here is 78 years old. They opened up at a different time. They had a lot of runway to grow, and let alone the economics that made sense at the time that established their brands was to go and essentially commodity, build to a scale, send it in rail cars, so on and so forth. So what we have today, or the last especially 20 years, is you have multinationals that own, I think the last one was 40 Creek, maybe that, was kind of independent initially, and then it got bought out.
Yeah.
But what we have, we have multinational players that are playing on a totally different chessboard than what we do, locally, and so I don't blame them. They're moving pieces, looking at a global sense in their distribution. And unfortunately, the Canadian whiskey piece is the commodity. So they want high volume, cheap, whiskeys to go into, whether it's blends or make up a component, of a release, that is, say, 80% made out of Alberta, and then, they throw in some other stuff, because it is light and approachable, that then they add personality, essentially, and let alone, marketing wise, they could stick a label, they could stick a, Canadian label on it, but that doesn't sell well. If they could get $10 more a bottle because there's a Kentucky label on it, that's what they'll do. And do we blame them? I don't know. They're just looking at it purely from, hey, where can they get money and what's in their repertoire? What's the tools they can use on a global sense to feed their global distribution? Okay.
And none of us blamed Whistle Pig when they took our whiskey and they claimed it as their own, the Whistle Pig 10-year-old, but we claimed it ourselves. Like they were saying it was theirs, but we kind of took that back. Those of us that knew where.
Well, that touches into the thing that, like, are Canadians so modest that we're actually not great at marketing, our products, right? Mm-hmm. So then that's where it's like the redefinition, or next chapter, where I think every independent whiskey maker in this country can make independently owned brands and products that we're proud of, that represent the places we're from, and it's still Canadian whiskey.
Yes.
I think the opportunity is, we've seen in the last 20 years, when we think of beer, the erosion of our Canadian brands in beer, just simply because the energy hasn't been put into branding from the multinational beer brands. When I grew up, when I turned 18, there was Molson Canadian, Labatt Blue. There's always this thing of Canadian beer was stronger than American beer, but there was a lot of pride in our beer. Yeah. Now you see it Budweiser, Coors Light, Coors Banquet, barely can I see a Labatt Blue. I think the only place I know that sells it is Ducky's karaoke bar in Calgary, and I wasn't even a Labatt drinker when I was younger, but now I go there just to have a Labatt Blue, just to reminisce of, getting an idea of what it used to taste like, kind of thing, Okay. So I don't I see the opportunity with independent producers in every province, and especially Alberta, which I do believe is the leading province in distilling currently. I do see the opportunity for us to start taking on what Canadian whiskey looks like.
And we'll be happy to have an Alberta trail. If we could ever have an Alberta trail, it's a shame though, because we're massive. So actually having an Alberta trail that goes from, let's say, Calgary a little bit south through to, I don't know, into Banff, up to Jasper, back to Edmonton.
Jasper, now Capri, he's doing well.
Well, Jasper, Edmonton, it's a beautiful trail, but it's going to take a little while. I think for people to actually do it.
It's an adventure for sure. Yeah, it's a commitment. It's an adventure.
But no better province for it, I don't think, with our malted barley and how we malt everything here. The malted, and you have malted wheat in which one of yours? It's the one you did with Kingston Wine Market. You had malted wheat in there as well, right?
Yeah, it was.
How about Tequera? Was that malted wheat or just malt and wheat with the Demerara?
Yeah, so it's actually, the wheat component is a roasted wheat in it.
Roasted, okay.
Yep.
And the difference for you in flavor is what? When we go from malted to roasted, so how's it change? For me, wheat is just, it's light, it's airy, it gives kind of a bubblegummy flavor to it, a little bit fruity that way. If I'm roasting it as opposed to malting it, how's that change?
It'd be similar to adding a roast barley.
Okay.
Because Tequera, the whole genesis of Tequera actually follows an imperial porter recipe.
Yes.
That uses.
I've got the write-up if you want here. Go ahead and talk about it, and I'm going to throw it up here.
Yeah, that use roasted wheat over roasted barley, and the reason for that, why brewers use a roasted wheat, is to avoid any kind of over bitterness or acrid notes to it, but let alone it provides the color. So we just left it in there to add a roasted carrot.
And that's, the sugar flavor from the Demerara. Am I saying that right? Because I'm having
Demerara. Demerara. Yeah, raw sugar. Unrefined sugar.
Brown sugar. It's refined differently, but it's essentially brown sugar. And you have that with the malt.
Unrefined. Brown sugar.
Unrefined.
Yeah, so brown sugar is white sugar that's molasses added to it.
Right.
Demerara is unrefined sugar.
But it's cane sugar as well.
Yes.
Okay, good. And you know what? I wanted this, and specifically, sorry, so I'm going to my iPad on the side because I can't see these as much, but we talk about the 1/11th rule in here. And this made me really happy. Not because I love the 1/11th rule, but I love transparency above all else within whiskey. I really do. So I'm just going to read this. And named after Mount Tekerara in Jasper National Park. This is a whiskey of unique depth, a bold 48%, which I really appreciate. Thank you very much. It features a unique grain bill inspired by Imperial Porter, like you were just saying, that uses masterful selection of malts, superior pale, crystal, dark crystal, and chocolate, and midnight wheat. Rooted in the Canadian 1/11th rule. And that's what I want to highlight. Rooted in the 1/11th rule. Tekerara artfully combines malt barley and the unique addition of Demerara, creating a cascade of flavors. Man, this is...
Tekera and Demerara. Tekera is the mountain Tekera, that we part of the Maligne range, and then Demerara.
And talk about the 1/11th rule, because I don't love the rule, but I respect it when it's stated, when you can see straight up that it's being used and people are not hesitant to say, we're using it. That's what makes me happy with that. Otherwise, when people claim something is theirs and it's not, that makes me kind of angry a little bit as a purchaser of good whiskeys. And when it seems hidden, you're not hiding nothing in here, and I love that. So if you could talk about that for a second, please.
Before you speak to, if you don't mind, Dolph, I'll just add, like, from a brand perspective, and just as a co-founder, transparency, and I appreciate that you've noted that and are talking about it here. Coming back to our vision of being in a position to hopefully play a role in redefining how locally, regionally, and nationally, hopefully beyond, people start to think about Canadian whiskey. At the end of the day, what I've experienced in business and B2B, but also with our guests, is so much of the ability to fulfill that vision is around trust. And it's really hard to build trust, to get people to go try new things and get out of their comfort zones if you're not being transparent. And so that's where that's coming from. It feels it's a core value for us in many ways, and to the brand. And so Bryce will speak specifically to it, but it was just it's a non-negotiable and a core kind of tenet to how we go forward. And Bryce will speak to how he sees that and how we brought that to this particular product. But we for this product and everything we do, that's a core piece. When we have the opportunity to work with our peers, some in BC that we've been able to purchase and blend some of our products with, like it's just insofar as we can get the alignment and the permission to be fully transparent on that, that's how we're going to continue to build this brand and our portfolio.
Well, that's what we want. And on every bottle, and you do this on the back as well, you have non-chill filtered, no color added. The other thing I'd like on most bottles is if people use neutral grain spirits, that's something I would want to know. That's and I ask everyone and every distillery I go into, and if it's the quick can, the quick cocktail drinks, that really doesn't matter to me, to tell you the truth. But when you're paying for a beautiful whiskey, you're hoping it's a beautiful whiskey that comes from the establishment, what you've seen there, and not a gigantic still. So thank you for that. Keep it up. Let's go back to the 1/11th rule with the Tekera, with the Demerara. I'll get it too.
You'll get it. So 1/11th rule is, it's fairly unique. It is unique in Canadian whiskey. So we've kind of chatted on how Canadian whiskey is looked at, and the unfortunate thing with the 111th rule, it's really a product of the viewpoint of Canadian whiskey being a commodity.
Yep.
It was created to exploit a loophole, at the time of exporting to the US, where essentially, if something was added to the whiskey as 111th or 9.09%, some people say the 909 rule, then therefore it wasn't considered whiskey, and therefore it, didn't have a certain level of tariff or tax or whatever, as an opportunistic aspect. I think part of it, though, it sits there, and it's always going to be part of the definition, that's there, because there's brands of Canadian whiskey that use it, but, actually, shockingly, it's not like every brand uses it or anything like that. It's there. Yeah. It's kind of in the history of it. So this is where I take a look at, you give that opportunity, to, a big player, or at the time when it was created, they want to sell whiskey, they want to sell it to our biggest trade partner. Yeah. Here's a way to do it. They're going to exploit
that. Much less if you're using their products to do it. Yeah. Yeah.
So then today, how does that get interpreted by, today's independent, smaller players? And I think that's really a challenge. To me, it's keep it in. Let's see who plays around with it and kind of where it can go and what we can do. I think our interpretation of it is we will always, if we are going to employ the 111th rule in some way, it's always going to be with something. It's not like throwing in flavoring to mask nuances of whiskey. It's still the very loose definition of Canadian whiskey. It has to taste like whiskey. Well, that's very, very loose. But, I think initially, it was used as either to mask flavor or as a rounding agent, that was there. And I think with the independents and more creative and people, who are very passionate about this, what their interpretation is of it. So, for us with Tequera, it was, rather than finishing in rum cask, like what's the difference between finishing in a fresh dump rum cask, which has still some rum in it, 10 liters per se, 20 liters, 20 liters into 200.
That's 1/10. You're left on
1/10 right there, right? So for us, we wanted to kind of go back of like, well, we could, and once again, this whiskey, its genesis was an imperial porter recipe that used demerara sugar. To be true to that recipe, of essentially side by side, we're making a rum, with that, as far as it's mashed, it's fermented, and it's aged fully, and it does the whole journey. Some people interpreted the rule that it has to be, aged separately and then blended in,
Yep.
To us, that's really, historically, maybe that's how it's done as an adulterant, but we look at the 111th rule could be also used in synergy with, whiskey that's being made.
All right.
It complements. So we're a big one on it, has to complement the whiskey flavor, there. So for us, I think the demerara and Tequera, adds a very, what we tell people in tastings is, because demerara rums are fairly like floral, as I take a look at it in the finish, there's this kind of nice floral rum note kind of finish. And it's like this Easter egg that people could try to find within the profile.
Perfect. We're going to leave it at that, but we're going to add in another element because, so Brett, you talked about previously how you've worked with other distillers, other distilleries, and the whiskeys. So let's get back to your whiskey, and because I'm going to ask where you've distilled, blended, proofed, aged, bottled all of your whiskeys, and hope. Because you think you would have, because you have so many different places, that all of these things are not happening in each individual area. It doesn't make sense to do that business-wise. So I'm just wondering where we could picture this happening. So distilling is happening where for you, and not specifically where, but whatever you can tell us is also being distilled and you're kind of bringing in. Because you're starting off, this is 5-year-old whiskey, and you've had the chance to distill for over 5 years. So this could have all been yours, and you could have just said, well, it's all ours, and had a non-disclosure agreement with someone else and just claimed it. But you didn't. You said you're getting help, and you're working with these other community members. So if we can open that up, please. Again, distilled, blended, proofed, aged, bottled. Where's all this stuff happening?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Dolph, I'll just actually take one step back from that first and just talk really quickly about in terms of community that we're thankfully a part of. You know, when we first started, like I said, we bought that still out of Germany and anticipated that we'd have permission to be able to actually start using when they get rid of that minimum production requirement. Ourselves and David Farron from Eau Claire and the folks from Park in Banff, Yanni and Stav. Early days, one of the first things we got excited about was like, how are we going to work together here? And Bryce is now the president and chair for the Craft Distillers Association, which is the stand-up, more mature group from what was started back in the day when they first allowed us to actually get in at this scale. And so I think, before I get into where we've made product, and there's kind of two categories of that in terms of where we've made it and where we've aged it. Lots of stories there. But, I think it starts with that right out of the gate, that collaborative across the whole province and to degree even talking outside the province, but really how do we approach this as a community and across the whole province to see this opportunity come into itself. So to answer your question more specifically, like I said before, when the rules changed, we had this really expensive, beautiful copper paperweight in Fort McMurray that we could start to use and make some whiskey, and we did that. And again, thankfully to Bryce, we did a lot of fun, some weird stuff. We did a meat sweat at one point. A lot of weird stuff, but the core of it still is to produce whiskey, and coming from the perspective of the brewers, creativity. And I'm gonna Bryce has been talking back to a few minutes ago about the 111 through or the 909, and I'm going to borrow something he said that really resonates when we're talking to our team about how they can talk about whiskey and get people excited about it.
Yeah,
the opportunity we have afforded to us by the Food and Drug Act Part B, I think it is. Bryce, I think specifically, is one of my favorite things he's ever said is that we've got in contrast to say the U.S. market, the Appalachian, we've got a chessboard and they have a checkerboard, and there's nothing positive or negative to say about either, but we've got a lot more moves we can make with the chessboard versus the checkerboard. And again, this is Bryce's words or his idea, not mine. But within that,
and that mirrors what Dr. Don says. He says that a lot. So you're complementing each other with what's good.
So, in terms of our production, again, we started in Fort McMurray very creatively. Again, I'll steal one more thing that my business partner Socrates has said is, we wanted to begin the process by building a palette of colors, knowing that we're maybe building this, this consistent canvas to paint on, but a lot of colors. Our inventory, our current whiskey, it's a quite eclectic mixture of different products, and we're having fun with it now that we're finally at a point that we can start to, leverage that, bring that to market. But yeah, it started Fort McMurray, producing up there through we had that operation. When we opened up in Calgary, certainly starting to do some unaged on the gin front and some other stuff, but again, a focus on the aged side. And then we've also had the opportunity to work with some producers, Lone Pine particularly in Edmonton. Thankfully, there's capacity from the production side at many of our peers throughout the province, and it's a tough business, especially on the aged side. You're talking about literally taking capital and laying it down, and it's almost you're banking yourself, and it's very difficult for small businesses, and many of them operate sort of around that hospitality sphere, which is not fun to bank and not very easy to bank. And so we leveraged every angle we had, our own cash flow, our own operations, our peers, our relationships, and fast forward to where we're today. We've also been able to work with partners from other parts of the craft industry, and hopefully some of the more legacy players in time too, to start to bring some opportunities of bringing their age product and blending with some of ours. And again, all going back to that vision of getting people excited about Canadian whiskey, not as a commodity.
Not as commodity. We'll always say that Canadian whiskey, not as commodity.
And I guess I didn't answer your question in terms of where we've aged it. Later, but Bryce is well, probably a little bit of PTSD on that front, but we've aged our product all over the place.
So to go to your original question, where we go. So yes, majority of our production, is at a last best. That's where we started. This goes back to even your question about Maligne. It never started 10 years ago as Maligne. That wasn't even an idea. That didn't even happen until 3 years ago. Yeah. So if you follow kind of the our company, we have every location has its own brand, right? And it's usually followed that that beer is produced at that brand or whatever. And so that was actually how we started. So all the whiskey that was made at Last Best was to be Last Best whiskey. All the stuff that was made in Fort Mac was to be Wood Buffalo whiskey. And then eventually we started realizing that, okay, that could change. Whiskey could actually live in a lot of different places. It's a non-perishable product. It has infinite life. So therefore it could be adapted. So when all of a sudden the opportunity, for the Chabot Theater, that we could go into a space, that was like, well, what should we put there? Should we start from scratch and start making whiskey and call it that? Or do we start shifting our inventories? Or start shifting our brand home to that. So that's what we're exploring now. And that's a totally new thing for Bear Hill to do, Bear Hill being the umbrella company. So that's something we're learning, we're paying attention to, and we're monitoring. And, what's incredible about it is when you start anchoring brands to something as beautiful as a place of Jasper, let alone also laying it and having Maligne range as far as the restaurant goes, as solely focusing on Canadian whiskey. I think that's the only place in Canada that solely focuses on Canadian whiskey, with Maligne range whiskeys being the house brand. It allows us to kind of really execute this vision we had of being, a elite community player, in the market, where not only are we making our own whiskeys, but we could also be a home for others. And why I say that is when you get into the whiskey business, there's a hell of a lot of capital that has to be outlaid. Yeah. And sometimes, there's a whole point of whiskey where it's great to start making it, but then there's a whole aspect about selling it, marketing it, distribution, and so on and so forth. So what we start finding amongst, our peers is that some people were maybe overdrawn or overproduced, or they're trying to find either cash flow, because we're not in Canada. We don't have the grants accessible that they do in Scotland. We don't have the tax breaks that are accessible in the US. We're all doing this on our own and outlaying this capital, the warehousing and everything like that. So there's always cash that's needed in this business. Yeah. I think that's something that people really underestimate. There's always cash that's needed. And thank God we're making products that are non-perishable that could be traded for cash. So that's becomes currency. And this actually is historic. If you look at how Scotch whiskey started, single malts never were a thing, until about 50 years ago. It was blends that the single malts were feeding. Yep. And I see it this way, and all producers, internally, we talk about getting to this stage where we could barter, essentially. In Scotland, they have a currency. It's malt for malt and 2 grains for a malt. And they still have that today. It doesn't matter what the brand is, what the value of the brand is. It doesn't matter if your product sells for $40 a bottle and this one sells for $140. It's all the same currency. And we dream about that in Alberta, being able to do that. And we hold that dream. And I think where Brett and I with Maligne, we started realizing that we, despite, and it's hard to grow. The fire regulations are hard. That's what gives me PTSD all the time. Yeah. So, despite you could find an avenue, you can't produce enough. So therefore we start reaching out. And for us, we've drawn the line that, we want Alberta-made whiskeys. We want to, go in and work with other Alberta producers, that way. And, maybe we expand that scope to Western Canada or Canada, but right now we're starting with Alberta. And we found that Maligne and let alone be in Jasper, being a wonderful gathering place, it's also a gathering place for whiskey. So, we have skin in the game with making as much as we can. I think we convert more malts, at Last Best than we do beer at times. And then let alone we're an open door as an avenue for other, people as well, that we could kind of play with and play in and bring the product to market, with that.
All right. Well, what I was trying to get to with it is that maybe your job as the master distiller kind of went into the logistics side, because I was picturing you were the one deciding where things were kind of coming around, but maybe that was this Socrates individual. So not the philosopher, but you quoted Socrates. So tell us about this individual, and maybe he's the logistic guy. I don't know. Help us out.
He's not the logistics guy. You'd be the first to admit that. The logistics have been, a product of necessity primarily. Where we moved our inventory around, starting Fort McMurray a little bit on site, and then, with the change of the rules, we had to the best of our ability, sort of navigate what there was for regulations, and we moved it around a lot over the years. We have a safe and comfortable home for it in one spot now, but I think it's after probably close to
to Kara, if you want to talk about the aging profile, it's aged. It's been all from northern Alberta to southern Alberta. It's been moved around. It's been in central, and that was really out of necessity. We were forced to have to move things. Like Brett said, we do have a home, for that right now, that's stable. But in the initial year, this is just pivot, of what you kind of have to do. And, this is the thing, is that despite the AGLC, they're really great to work with and great partners and allowing small distilling, the other rules that allow it to thrive, I would say, are behind, which is what on the association side is exactly what I fight for and try to change all the time.
Yeah, I'd add to that, certainly very progressive changes on the provincial liquor board side, and not that there'd been a necessity for a lot of change, but very easy to work with Canada Revenue, Federal Excise. They're a major player, obviously, in this spirit world. I remember our first excise officer when we got into spirits. We'd been in beer for a long time, and it's with beer you can ask permission. With spirits, for mistakes, you don't. It's a different world. There's a lot more very strict.
You're not begging forgiveness afterwards.
No, but it's still great to work with. Canada Revenue, AGLC, you got to be very, very clear that you're playing within the guardrails. The challenge, as Bryce said, is just our view, the association's view, and my view as a participant in the industry is that while we progress in terms of opening up the opportunity within the province, and I think this is to a degree outside of Alberta, particularly within Alberta, we just have not seen the municipal level, somewhat provincially integrated in terms of how we can work with those opportunities on especially the fire code. It's a real challenge. It's we're over 10 years in now, and there hasn't really been any real progression on that front.
I usually ask who helped you the most to get set up, and what's the biggest hurdle, but I've heard the fire code a couple times from everybody. So let's go. Was that your biggest hurdle in Jasper specifically, was fire code and adhering to it? And I'm picturing a giant wall that had to be explosion proof because you're serving food there at the same time. So
I have to mention too, there's a bit of another variable in Jasper, given that we're within the national park and the Parks Canada variable in terms of, I'm sure we've all seen the Bill C-76 and the changes that will come with that. But it's still, Parks Canada has a major role there. What we did in Jasper, because of the provincial situation, is we've built it we put the still in, we built it to the extent that we believe will fit what will come, but we're just waiting on sort of some of the finality, the crystallization of those actual policies, so we can move into an operational stage. Because right now there is no clarity. And Parks Canada, I just want to be absolutely clear, was very clear to work with. It was a process, but there was clarity there to move forward. So it's
all right. So they weren't the biggest problem.
No, Parks, they
Parks
get that
Canada
reputation.
wasn't.
They're really not. They have that reputation, and I'll just go a little political here. Having done projects in five municipal jurisdictions, 2 of them within Parks Canada, so I can tell you Parks Canada is not that difficult. Relatively.
All right.
I could easily break it down for you of what's really beneficial in Alberta and what are the hurdles, which is not just actually in Alberta. It's more of a national thing. But what's very beneficial in Alberta, we have the AGLC. We have an authority that really allows flexibility in a way that you could open up other things that help you with revenue. And one thing with being tasting rooms, restaurants, or what we call Class A's, that works. You're not allowed to do that in every province, as well. We're allowed to.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bryce, you're cutting out on me. If you can hear me, we're going to have you kind of rehash that if you can. And let's see if I could do something to get you back on track with me.
Go ahead.
Oh, I got you back. We're good.
There we go. So anyway, the revenue streams you're able to create, are great in this province, to do that. The hurdles, I think for anyone getting in the whiskey business, let alone distilling, number one is the capital expenditure, out. Everyone thinks that, is distilleries cheaper than what breweries are? Not necessarily. You have to put in brewing. If you're doing like total grain to glass kind of thing, you have to put the brewing equipment, the distilling equipment, is not cheap, as well. The outlay of capital to build whiskey inventory, and it's not, this isn't huge. This isn't whiskey inventory. Like the calculation isn't like, I'm making 20 barrels and I'm going to sell that in 3 years, because like that's my forecast, it's, you got to be making like 40 barrels or, like there's a certain percentage that you want to hold back, because once again, we're trying to get an age, a respectable age that gets up and competes on the global stage. When you're going against Scotch whiskey, that, the entry level for a Scotch is 10 years. The entry level for a bourbon is 6, so you want to hold back. So you actually have to produce more and hold back than what you're actually going to sell. Plus, you're going to have to warehouse that. You're going to have to build the warehouse. There's a whole bunch of regulations around that makes it fairly expensive. You're not just putting it in shacks, in the woods or on a field somewhere. If you wanted to, follow everything by the rules, so that's the time aspect is a big layout. Staffing on who's going to do it, is a big thing. The taxation is a big thing, as well. We're in a country that I believe that, the tax is afforded by the big guys who have had, in this province, Alberta Distillers is 78 years. So nearly 100 years of an ability to afford the taxes that are paid on alcohol, let alone it doesn't get into the politics of anything else regarding, alcohol has its ebbs and flows as well. So there's, it's an industry that is very unique, with lots of hurdles. So, if you want to get into it, there's all these kind of
barriers. You got to be ready to play within.
You got to be ready to play.
All right. Let's go to a couple other questions I like, because we've got the distiller with us. So I want to know the very first alcohol distilled, and was it sold? Was it potable? Was it good? The first whiskey distilled, was it good? And was it used in something? Or do you still have the barrel maybe sitting there somewhere of the very first and it's got a big number 1 on it type thing? Do we have these? Do we have?
Yeah, we haven't released barrel 1s or anything like that.
Can I?
Yeah.
So he's gonna have a way better. So I just want to throw a little bit very personal thing into this. And so my wife went into labor for my son, who's turning 11 tomorrow. Actually, we have this. We're taking the Oilers game tomorrow night. I'm really looking forward to it. So we had this teed up when my wife went into labor. Our brewer at the time, Kyle Smythe, up in Fort McMurray had everything prepared to mash in a whiskey wash. So she went to labor. We called up and Kyle mashed in, and we went with a whiskey that quite literally was started at the same time my son was born. So this is not the answer you're looking for, but just want to throw that in. We had a lot of fun. The storytelling opportunities in this world are just fantastic, and
We got to take it. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
So anyway, so Bryce, I totally
no, and then so we have that. That's actually that whiskey continued from Fort Mac. We've now produced it in Last Best as well, and that will be a future kind of core brand that we will release. We've always stuck with that initial whiskey. As far as in the early years, do they taste good or not? Of course they taste good.
Of course. What the hell are you talking about?
However, and that's not necessarily why we haven't released them. I think it's always a thing with whiskey is and maybe this is subjective. If it doesn't taste good, let it age longer. Let's see what happened. I think in 2 weeks when you talk to Capri, he'll have numerous theories and opinions of is his whiskey tasting good or bad, or is it going to taste good or bad? I think when I talked to him, I said, Capri, it's going to taste good. I
will say though, Bright, this is actually how he called me and tasted something out of the barrel and been like, it was good and it's really not good. And then 6 months, a year later, like it's really it's not a matter of just like a linear sort of upward trajectory. There's many times I'm like, oh, that's a little
plateau.
It's done that, and even where something. I guess maybe we talk too much about the bit of sort of empirical experience we've had around the aging and how that works in a highly variable humidity and temperature changing environment. Where we, the beast, for example, it was starting to round off past the point that could have gotten, overly mellowed out and stuff. So, sorry to interject, but it's been fun watching Bryce, who's a true expert of this, from my seat in the bus. It's not always just like going like this. It's like it's a bit of this too, right?
Yeah, I think I could talk about some of the interesting products. I would say when I say interesting, maybe we chose not to go that direction.
But it's still damn good. We'll just put that out there, everybody.
That's right. Interesting products. I think this is what happens with, in the craft industry, and you talk, even selection of stills and stuff, is when you get in the craft industry, there's a, what do you want to make? Well, I want to make everything. There's a lot of people that believe they can tackle it all. And, that's great, if you want to, but there's a whole aspect of then the energy it takes to brand something, the story that goes behind it and so on and so forth. Right. So I don't think it really follows the same way as a craft brewery where you make all these different beers, and people are enjoying them. I think it's novel, the people who tackle that, but I think for us is, we've made rum before. I don't know. I wouldn't say it's the best rum I've ever had, we've Brett mentioned we made a meat sweat aquavit. So that was our iteration on a northern Canadian aquavit, which is typically Scandinavian. So focusing on caraway, but we used, I was influenced by mezcal at the time, especially Pachunga, which is they hang rabbits or chickens in the still. And so I was like doing this cross fusion between aquavit and Pachunga, where I was taking an aquavit approach focused on caraway, but I was adding Mexican spices or into it, but let alone rather than, the raw meat aspect, nothing represents Alberta more than raw bison. So I had about 2.5 kilos of raw bison, in the still, dripping into the still, what was going, and we called that meat sweat. I think the best description of that was primal, and both aroma and taste. I would say it's acquired taste, and I'm not saying that it tasted bad. It actually, shockingly, a lot of people like it, and it's actually that product's gone everywhere from the North Pole to South America to aquavit clubs. It's kind of it's created its own lore a little bit.
Right. Okay.
Even though we don't make it, we still have some product left, and about 3-4 times a year, we get people contacting us about it. Do you have any left? Like, it has its own little cult following.
That's just fun, though, right?
So these are kind of
fun
things that we looked at. We're always open to that kind of thing. We played with hops before, especially during COVID. So in our warehouse, one really awesome thing is that because of course we make beer as well, during the opening and shutdown and opening, one thing that we wanted to make sure, for quality wise, we didn't want these pubs to have stale beer, because during shutdowns there's all this beer, it's sitting in hallways or whatever. So we always wanted to make sure when reopening's happening that our customers had fresh beer. So we would exchange the beer with fresh beer. Well, then what do we do with all this stuff coming in? Well, at the time, you're going through layoffs and everything. So it allowed us to actually bring a staff member on and pay just to distill beer that we were bringing back. And now we've been aging that. Actually, some of that beer is now well over 3 years old. It's considered hopped whiskey, or whatever. We could look at it that way, which is shocking. If you go around Scotland, they're actually playing around within the rules that they were noticing that way back in the day, they put hops within whiskey. So they're exploring that component of whiskey addition.
Scott Whiskey Association's okay with that, eh?
They're looking at it. It's history, so they have to look at it that way.
So which hops actually work, though? Because I've distilled some of my beer that's been hopped, and some work and some don't. And I'm wondering, do you have a list of those that you think do work, or are you just waiting in time just to see if it works?
So we're waiting, but yes, you're right. Some work and some don't.
But also, I will, like, back to what I was talking about in terms of the ebbs and flows of good, the bad, and up and down. That was a particular product that, for us, it was Show Pony primarily and Tokyo Drift, if I recall correctly. That we had a pretty predominant distribution position on them, and they were so decent quantities, and horrendously terrible aromas and whatnot in the first few years, and then magically, I think it might have been around the year 3 or 4 that Bryce was like, "Oh my gosh, this is something special." Almost, I remember we did a tasting maybe 2 years ago, and you got almost something you could characterize in the realm of something you might use on the a spectrum creating perfumes, like the aromas coming. It was absolutely shocking in terms of the positive aroma profiles coming out of them. Pretty special. But hops typically don't do well.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So we played around the Beast out of Wood Buffalo. That was another kind of keeping the door open. So the Beast being malt that was with the forest fire. So we did that.
There's your write up for the Beast.
Yeah. So we've always been open to kind of new doing kind of things, and I would say some have been hits, maybe some have not, but you have to look at, like, how are you going to market something and go forward with it. But we hold all these things that maybe it's a card we play in the future.
And why not? You've got the barrels, you've got the space, you do it, and over time. The one thing I really did like, though, about the Beast is how you contacted Bards and you sent that to them for their analysis. So it wasn't just your opinion as to did it change or did it not. You sent it to the people who were actually sending you the peated barley, malted barley in the first place, and getting their opinion of it, which was really quite cool, to tell you the truth. I like that. So
yeah, we had to confirm the transformation, right? So
yeah,
but yeah, it was great.
It speaks to, like, just how small this
industry actually is.
Right? You're talking one of the largest suppliers and one of the best suppliers, and it was literally from first degree of separation. Just, hey, phone call, and this is what we're thinking. Boom, we're on it, and we'll let you know. And it was just, it's how behind the scenes, I can tell you, being a part of it. Much more so even in the beer space, which we've been in longer, but the spirit space, it's a pretty small community and very supportive. That's a perfect example.
That's beautiful. I love that. And we're going to end on that note pretty well, gentlemen, if we can, because I could keep you here forever. And the thing is, there's so many different places and so many different questions for different areas. It was hard for me to just stick with the Maligne range. And we didn't even talk about the whiskey. So I've been sipping Decorator for most of it, but the Amber Mountain, because let's get your impressions of it, because this is the first time you two have gotten together with it. So I'd like your impressions as we're doing it. I love the mouthfeel. The nose is enticing. It's light. It's fruity. And I'm going to leave it there for a second. I'll add to it, but I don't want to change your opinions or make you change mine. So what do you think?
So we've been diving into Amber Mountain. For us, So for this is what I do like is, so some of it, so this is actually the first. Takara is something that we made wholly in Last Best. Same with before that Excelsior. This is the first kind of venturing out of that where we've brought in a source whiskey. So one component, the rye component, is originally produced in Alberta, and then found its way out to British Columbia, where it did a majority of its aging, at sea level, and then we brought it back. We brought it back here, and then we blended it with our single malt that we have done. And where I kind of liked it in just the simplicity of it is, so you have this. Spicy. I think Alberta rye is not, compared to some of the American rye, is not as spicy as what you have, but you have this moderate spice note, some grassy note, to it. But, I like rye grain whiskeys because there's some sharpness to it. But I think it lacks at times body, and it lacks finish. So knowing the fruit notes that we throw off of our still at Last Best, bringing in some fruitier characteristics, adding body, and adding a length to the finish is where I liked to kind of play with this when we were approaching Amber Mountain here. So and once again, a rye of respectable age as well. And then I think the minimum age on this is it 5 or 6 years, I believe, on this. So
now, do you get a hint of sour? I'm on the nose, and it's just a little sourness.
I don't necessarily.
I don't want to go as far as like a dill pickle sour. I don't want to say that because there's no dill pickle for this or in this for me, but just kind of a hint of a sourness to it. I'm wondering if either of you are getting that.
No, I don't typically get that. I right away pick up on some of the the Twizzler note that comes from the malt, and then typically is the from the rye side, I lean more into some of the grassy characteristics, if not kind of light spice there.
And sweetness wise, I usually ask people what they think for sweetness. Is it caramel? Is butterscotch, honey, confectioner, sugar? For you, what are you thinking for this?
For sweetness on this, I typically throw out, and what throws off our still in Last Best is a lot of marzipan. I see a mild note of that in here. As far as if you want to go into the big kind of sweetness flavors like the butterscotch and the honey and so on and so forth, I think it probably rolls more in the, kind of the butterscotch note, but not necessarily, overpowering.
Okay. I was thinking more honey-like, and maybe that's where I'm getting kind of a sourness element to it, or more earthy.
Like a burnt honey?
Maybe. Well, the umami is where it's coming out. I was thinking that. Okay. What do you think there, Brett? You enjoying it?
I am, and for me, it also goes back to from the vision perspective. And my wife doesn't drink a lot of whiskey, and one of my friends don't. And this, I found it interesting, starting to appreciate and enjoy these three that we've had so far. How people that don't drink whiskey find them. This has been an interesting gateway for a number of my friends. It's approachable, especially with a little bit of water added to it. It just, kind of a gentle entry into light spicy notes, but also something quite approachable. But just this will sound kind of cheesy and very unsophisticated, but I just, a friend who is getting to whiskey and just like, I really like that. I don't know what I'm even getting. Tell me more. But what a beautiful entry point into being able to start to talk about, what you're finding there, and to get, into how we're trying to approach that in Maligne and Jasper. The experience is just a really basic flavor wheel and aroma wheel of, like, here's what you might find, and these how they relate back to whether it's the grains or the wood or the yeast and stuff, in terms of like, what can you find out of there, where it's coming from. Not for me, what I get with this, without getting specific to what I find about the different flavor and aroma compounds myself, is just what I think I enjoy more is it's a really great entry level experience for people to start to have those conversations and share what they're experiencing and how they relate back to those different core sort of nuclei components to it.
Yeah, I think a theme with any of our whiskeys, this goes with Tequila, it also goes with, Excelsior, if anyone finds that, with it being even 50% peated malt, any of our whiskey, and this kind of follows the Canadian whiskey theme of there's elegance to it. We're not going after, big assertive, peated flavors or sherry flavors or anything like that. We're not trying to mimic, Scotch whiskey, let alone, our counterparts that going after single malts and Canadian single malts. Go ahead, but for us, on this path of Canadian whiskey, we're actually towing the line on where that elegance, where that approachable aspects could go. We're just trying to add more to it, more story, a little bit more flavor, and we'll continue kind of developing on that path. But right now with our offerings, what our feedback that we get is so nice is that there's this elegant nature, there's this approachable nature to the whiskeys. There's this gentleness that follows the tone of where Canadian whiskeys are.
Well, I'm looking forward to having Excelsior. So I was at Kingston Wine Market 2 weeks ago, and I didn't ask about it. And
there's a little bit of a chance there. We lost some of our inventory in the fire in Jasper.
So it's going to be very hard to find
anything. Well, what they might have is a bottle in the back for tasting. I might not be able to buy it, but they might have the bottle there, right? Just like the Beast. I know that would be very hard to find. And because you did sell a bottle. I remember, it's got to be 5 years ago at least, where there was an auction and someone had bought the bottle, and it was a huge amount. It was fantastic, and it was donated, right?
Yeah, we sell a couple for about 10,000.
Yeah.
Right now, typically bottles at auction, when we even the last auction, we've pulled 3 or 4 auctions now. I would say the lowest that we've ever seen, I think, are around 2,000 or 2,200. But typically, last auction, it was quite consistent to go 4,000 and above.
Good.
Per bottle.
That might give you a reason, and hopefully some others watching this maybe come to Jasper. We're working on it sometime in February to hold the next auction in Jasper. And thankfully, the Fort McMurray Firefighters Association, we've all the proceeds have gone to that group, have generously aligned with maybe the idea that. Not maybe, but the idea for this next auction, which we'll hold in Jasper at the Maligne Range, the proceeds will go to a local Jasper fund. So, that should be February. I think we're thinking of. We're working with the Fairmont Jasper Park Lodge on that, and so that's something to look forward to.
That sounds fantastic, and you can bring so many things into it right now. In Jasper, it's just nice to kind of get the community together and bring people in. And Jasper Park Lodge is always fantastic too. I like them, and they're willing to have fun at the Jasper Park Lodge to kind of bring groups in. They're willing to do that. Some places are not, but they are very good. Well, gentlemen,
Joel, I'll just skip it. But I know you're about to do the wrap up, but I was just going to say the one thing we're going to do a little unique this year, and it's again to raise money for Jazzers. We're expecting that experience is going to include tasting a small sample of the Beast, which is we haven't done before. So sorry to interrupt, but yeah.
No, I'm there. Well, what I was going to say before I wrap up was, do either of you have any last thoughts? So You do. Let's do Bryce. No, Brett, do you have any last thoughts on anything that we did, opening up Jasper, seeing you in Banff, the progression of the company, anything that you would like to talk about the last couple of minutes?
I think for anyone, any of your listeners, I think right now is go, if they have an opportunity, go to Jasper and check out Maligne Range. But take a look at the community. I know there's times of of course part of the town is burnt, but really that community, a big factor is people visiting, and they're ready. Places have closed down. It might not be the same Jasper as what they remember, but there's a lot of really cool stuff there. Maligne, obviously opened up. Lots of great stories that are happening there. And they're very appreciative for anyone coming in and checking out their community right now while, they're in this process of rebuilding, but it's a unique time in Jasper. But I would encourage any of your listeners to go, and especially with, the Jasper Park Lodge, obviously, but with Maligne, not only Maligne Range whiskeys, but also a place that is solely focused on Canadian whiskey. If you want to get your fix, on Canadian whiskey, that is the place. Bring, whatever Canadian whiskey blog you look at, or Davin DeCurgamo's book, and sit at the bar and whatever, you could do that. That's the place. That's the place to do it right now.
And I'll piggyback on that. When we've all been to Jasper growing up forever, we have this picture in our mind of what it was. We need a picture of our mind, and this is kind of the middle ground, because it's going to change right after this. All the buildings, it's going to happen. Jasper's going to change drastically, I think, from this over the next 10 years. So I think you want the pre-fire idea in your mind. I think you want to go there to get an idea as to what's happened. You want to see it, I think. We've seen it on TV, but I think you want to walk the streets and see the places you've been to that are not there anymore. And that sounds horrible, but I think people need this in their mind just to see it. And then how it's changed in the future, just to get that kind of progression. I think everyone should do that. And I don't know if they can handle it logistically.
They can. They really can. And they want it. They need it. And I really appreciate saying that. My parents are still there. They lost their house, but they found a rental place, and the community wants it, needs it. And so I really appreciate you saying that it's a core piece that we need that message spread. Yeah. So one last thing that we didn't really get into.
You got it. You've got the floor, man.
I think it's a beautiful reflection and application of the vision we've been talking about, and getting people to be excited about Canadian whiskey at another level. Bryce did not talk about his other passion project. He's very close to the finish line on True Wild, which I've had the opportunity to see it near the finish line. It is one of the most beautiful spaces I've ever seen here in Calgary. So I just keep that in the front of your mind. It's a beautiful another example of this vision of bringing Canadian whiskey to a whole nother level. And so just True Wild, another project Bryce as the goal. It sounds like a bit of a shameless plug, but I think it's beautiful because we work together within our brand and what we built over the last 11 years, and Bryce is doing that as well with this other project. So I just wanted to mention that. I'm so excited. I think we're like a week away.
So, week away. Yeah, I've opened 2 weeks away of opening. But yeah, Brett, thank you for recognizing that I won't put shameless plugs about my own stuff.
I had to do it. So we're so excited. It's just another major pillar in where this business going. So.
Yeah, it will be the number one stop on the soon to be Alberta Whiskey Trail. Despite I'm a very proud Edmontonian, live in Edmonton. However, though, people will be the Louisville of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, where Calgary Airport people fly into. True Wild will be the first stop, and then they'll go around. So
they deserve to have an Alberta Whiskey Trail. Yes. Gentlemen, this was awesome. I can't wait for that, and I can't wait for our panel with Alberta Bound 2024 Banff Whiskey Experience. This has been fun. I could have asked more questions. My wife's been telling me to wrap up for a while now. I keep getting the message but I think this is fantastic, and I can't wait to talk to you guys there. Hopefully, you're there on Friday for our meet and greet where we can see everyone else in the industry. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And Bryce, I'm sure whatever you pick will be fantastic for that presentation. Cheers,
Well,
brother.
thank you so much. I'll say thank you to your wife for her patience and pleasure. This is great. Thank you very much.
Perfect. See you later. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Well, thank you so much.